So today's March 9th, my birthday. Gentlemen, abolitionists, pro-lifers, those who are in the struggle, please hear me. It's come to my attention, and I've seen on Facebook that we have clear leadership disputes, disputes on terminology, character, personality issues in question. And I just want to say, I believe the Lord's led me to talk about this stuff in a very short, simple, and concise message. It won't be much longer than 15 minutes. I could go on for an hour, but please hear me, brothers. You're going to really like this. I'm going to close with a proposition that I believe the Lord is leading us to. And if you can just humble yourself, shut away all distractions, I believe you will be moved by this message. And so listen to the very end, please. Today's my birthday, like I said, so happy birthday me, but even more important is what we're doing to end abortion. This is a national movement. I was baptized on January 22nd, so that's very significant for me. So the Lord arranged a baptism in the Gulf of Mexico in 2016. I did not plan. The Lord planned it. So this is very significant to me being part of the abolitionist movement and ending abortion here in Indiana. That's the anniversary of Roe Wade, right? This Goliath that the church is worshiping, that the lawyers are worshiping. I am a diehard abolitionist. I work with pro-lifers. I want to talk about how I have helped both the Jason Storms camp and the Russell camp, right? The Free the States camp. And then I want to talk about the broader movement, how I have helped locally, how I've met abolitionists here locally. When I first got this book, it was from a church out of Michigan, and Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates. I read it. It was phenomenal. I thought it was a great primer for anybody on the fence or Christians who are angry and leaving churches during COVID. I read it, and I've passed it to the right people at the right time, at pro-life prayer meetings and at potlucks. I have reached out to the right parties and made sure to get it back, make sure I follow up with them. I've reached out to Matthew Trahula and Jason Storms on Facebook, liking comments, sharing good posts, staying connected with the upper Midwest. I'm from East Lansing, so I have a huge heart for Milwaukee. I've worked and lived in Milwaukee. I've spent 20 years of my life in East Lansing. I've worked in Illinois. So this is special to me. This movement is very special. The hand of God is on the Storms Trahula camp and all those associates. Now the Russell Hunter camp, that's your freethestates.org. I have been able to make a lot of impact here by not reinventing the wheel. We have great slideshows and videos available through the gifts and talents and abilities of Russell Hunter and associates. Rachel Berkey has been to Fort Wayne. I've sent people to her meetings. I'm sending volunteers. I actually got to sit with Catholic councilmen in Fort Wayne and get their promise to watch the slideshow, the famous slideshow Mr. Hunter has put together. And I've had promises from political candidates to watch it. And I've followed up on those promises. So the paradigm is shifting because I am using the resources already created to change minds and hearts. And I'm sitting with leaders, volunteers, pro-life camps. And so that's what I'm doing for both sides. When I see value and I see talent, I want to use that. I want to promote that. Now, on the broader movement, the local movement, I first became acquainted with Indiana abolitionists here in Fort Wayne at the Planned Parenthood, where I've gotten to meet Joel, Merrick, Brent, Dan Groves, Amy Schlichter, Liberty Defense PAC, Hoosiers for Life, a lot of great people. David Mervar, his family. I can't list them all. I'm trying to keep this short. And so in the local movement, I have been very vigilant to not stop meeting together, encouraging each other. When they came into town for Planned Parenthood Church, I wanted to make sure that I would buy a pizza for the team. They drive, incur the cost of travel. I want to bless them with a meal. So that's kind of how I got in the fold. It's important to me that we support each other locally, and so I've been available for Zoom meetings. John Glick and Brent reached out to me. Hey, let's get a Zoom meeting. I jumped on that call. Being available to go to the events, talk on the phone, meeting some of the originals like Christine. I just attended a viewing of A Storm Comes Rolling Down the Plain. I invited the world, right? Everyone I thought, pastors I've networked with, I invited them to the viewing. It was my heart that they come and see what work has been done. And so to me, it's, as far as the Trahula camp, we know that God is moving that camp, and we know that abolition and the ending of abortion will happen in the government realm. This is where it will happen, is in the political realm. So that's why it's important that I read this and pass this and help that movement. And it's all part of the greater, broader movement to end abortion that we all know is the chief issue of our day. So let's address some of these things, and then let me get into my climax and my proposal, and I'm going to have a really neat, creative way of explaining how I believe I can help reconcile these ideas, disputes, to a common ground without compromise. The warning is that I have seen incredible movements fizzle out and dwindle because of similar issues, right? I've seen movements dissolve when gifts and abilities are not utilized, when titles and men become exalted over the greater movement, or when an organization starts to form and you start to develop organizational structures and impediments and bottlenecks. For instance, Jill bought my lunch before my breakfast before I ran off to a forum. Most organizations would have like a process for that. Okay, get a receipt, make sure you turn that into the office, make sure that goes through the 501. Hey, we don't have time to do all those things. So we're organized, but we're not an organization. We're a movement. This is a spirit-filled movement. And so gifts and abilities must be utilized. Titles out the window. Men, we know who the leaders are. We know who the rally points are. And we don't exalt them over the movement, but we do recognize who have done great things, who have pioneered the way. Organizational things like the 501, the finances, poor doctrine can fizzle out movements. And that gets into the terminology, that gets into the tenets of pro-life, history of pro-life and abolition. So movement versus organization. Let's stay movement-centered. Let's be Book of Acts spirit-driven and know that we are submitting to one another as unto Christ. And so that means taking tasks without assignment, just seeing a need and just tackling it, taking flack and criticism without losing your mind, being open to rebuke and correction, letting the Lord guide you, and not necessarily management. We submit to one another as unto Christ, and if we're married, we know how hard it can be to get our wives on board. So let's get into terminology here. That is important. I feel that I'm an abolitionist, and I think it's important at this point to use that term. I believe it makes clear distinctions, and it helps to group the sets of tenets and tactics that we've seen used for 50 years in pro-life and to this day. And then you have abolition. It's a term with historical validity, historical lessons. It's a good word. It's very self-explanatory. Abolition, to abolish, to make something go away. You see, it's not just enough to be for something. You have to be all in. And I think abolition is a term that kind of does define those who are all in. I I will talk about the word pro-life. I'm not going to call it a sin to use it, but let me continue here. So people, the voters, volunteers, are a very ignorant base. We know from foundations of conservative Christian leadership that very few votes will determine elections. Very few people really get down and dirty and get into the details, right? The devil's in the details. And because of that, we will have to use the term pro-life at times. It's going to come up, especially like if you're speaking to a pro-life group. You're going to use the word. Why? To make distinctions. And it's important that the ideas are attacked and not the people that use the terms, right? People are brand buyers. People want brands, they want slogans, they want to know that they're doing something new and fresh. And that happens to be abolition. We know that the tenets of abolitionism are biblical, they are working, they are historical. We saw in 1856, a political party rallied under the Republican Party, and Thaddeus Stevens opened up that national convention with the doctrine, right? This would be his abolitionist doctrine. He said, "It is the duty of the Congress to prohibit in these territories the twin relics of barbarism, slavery, and polygamy." He said that is the goal of this party. And so abolition, we are not a political party, right? We're a spirit-filled brotherhood, not a fraternity, a brotherhood of modern-day abolitionists who want to abolish abortion as quickly as possible. And so that's why it's important to have these terms. I have met enough people in the pro-life camp holding on to the pro-life methods who just will not let go, that I have seen clear as day the need for distinctions and the labeling. It's not a label, it's a word, and the word has meaning. We talked about that with the state of emergency. Why are we in a state of emergency? That word should have meaning. And abolition has very clear meaning. And I believe that Russell Hunter has done an exceptional job laying out those differences. And I think that if you had to pick what frame of thought or ideology you belong to, you use the word abolitionist and you explain why. And for those who are hanging on, you just smile and nod, and we'll get into that. So people want the brand, people want a rally point. They need words that have meanings. We use words like Baptist or Pentecostal or evangelical, and they have meaning. We use words. It's not a label or an insult. It's not a pigeonhole. It's truth. So push that aside. Let me continue here. We're at 13 minutes. You're really going to like my climax. It's very important you hang in here. I'll just jump back here. A lot of those holding on to the pro-life language, I find many of them are not all in. Find many of them do not want to help and come under leadership. Many of them are very stubborn. Many are older females. Many of them do not have strong husbands at home. I'm going to say that. And for those who, I've also found that they struggle to let go of friendships, habits, and events that are part of their culture and way of doing it. And they're clearly not working. And so the pro-life sin in my book is the inability to recognize not just what you've done right, but what you have not done right, where you failed. And that doesn't go without, that goes without saying that abolitionists, there's many of things that we do that, and you could say have failed in our approach. I'll go there briefly. So like, for instance, there's times when, like say an abolitionist is at a Planned Parenthood, and it's one of those Planned Parenthoods that aren't very strict on property lines. There's not a strong demonic presence as others. There's always a demonic presence. But as people come in, if there is freedom to approach those people, we could get up close, personal, hand on shoulder and say, hey, could I pray for you? Could I intercede for you? We have help. And if that's an option, we can do it. And let's be honest, there are abolitionists that choose that language who are very visceral and very vitriolic. They do not wish to intercede. They're more of the bullhorn prophet types. And if everybody was a bullhorn prophet, wouldn't be the best thing, right? We need to have the Christines there who will beg and plead for the mom to not murder her child in the interim period, right before abolition becomes a way of life and we close these things down. We will need love, listen, discern, respond, this methodology that is, more the pro-life thing. Having said that, I have never tolerated criticism of the bullhorn prophets when they are needed and when they are using their gifts and abilities as God called them. For instance, there are times when a Planned Parenthood has a strong demonic presence, police presence, death courts are on the perimeter, and you do not have the option to shoulder up with a mother. In that case, you have to raise your volume, you have to raise the intensity, and cry out to them. And for those who are watching from the sidelines or on Facebook, they criticize that and they say that's not love, that's not Christian. And I never tolerate that. I defend those bullhorn prophets. I defend those Matt Brocks who are up on the ladder over the fence. I defend them because not only are they forced to work that way, but I will never let a pro-life snowflake convince me or others that Christian compassion is mutually exclusive with a heralding out with voice and volume and outcry and even declaration of sin. I mean, she's going to go kill a baby. I'll be honest, why aren't we breaking more laws to stop that? I mean, I would say some of the ones that get the most criticism aren't doing enough. After all, they could run up there and barricade between the woman and the door and risk a misdemeanor infraction to maybe change her mind. So let's just get that out of the way. I'm an abolitionist. The term is valid. I do not tolerate criticism towards the bullhorn prophets, but I also at times see the value in some of the more loving, gentle ways, the nurturing styles of the females, right? That's why it's a two-gender mission. We need moms, dads, girlfriends, women, daughters. It's everybody. Okay, so we're almost at 20 minutes. I'm getting into the good stuff. So here we go. There's a book that I think really describes what we're in here. And that's war. We are at war. This book is called Angels in the Sky. And I'd like to read to you the inside cover. In 1948, only 3 years after the Holocaust, the newly founded nation of Israel came under siege from a coalition of Arab states. The invaders vowed to annihilate the tiny country and its 600,000 settlers. A second Holocaust was in the making. Outnumbered 60-1, the Israelis had no allies, no regular army, air force, no superpower to intercede on their behalf. The United States, Great Britain, and most of Europe enforced a strict embargo on the shipments of arms to the embattled country. In the first few days, the Arab armies overran Israel. The Egyptian Air Force owned the sky, making continuous air attacks on Israeli cities and army positions. Israel's extinction seemed certain. Israel's extinction seems certain. We know we're at war. We know that this is a battle. And we don't get to play by the rules of the pro-life decades. And in 1948, the state of Israel was coming back into the world. And it was a volunteer air force that made it happen. And I'm going to read some quotes that are just going to blow your mind that connect back to abolition. Specifically, the upper Midwest, where the Jason Storms camp is, and the Dust Bowl, where the Russell Hunter camps are. Down in Florida and Indiana, we have common ground. Let me read some of these quotes. Page 229. It says here, it was a grueling operation for the air crewmen, sleeping by day and flying by darkness. Each crew made 3 or 4 trips at night to the Negev. The Air Force gave the operation an appropriate name, Avak, the Hebrew word for dust. The young airmen who remembered the 1930s in Middle America gave it their own name, Operation Dust Bowl. That is interesting. We know that Oklahoma is a Dust Bowl state. Let me read page 91. Zebra was just one of the code names used for staging bases. The Haganah, the volunteers, were learning. They loved ciphers and cryptology and codes. In message traffic, the United States was called Detroit. The Volunteer Air Force used the word Detroit, right, to denote the United States. If they were going to bring planes to and from America to Czechoslovakia, that was their code word. And so Detroit, that like symbolizes your Matthew Trahulas, your Jason Storms, and all the associates. That's your Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, maybe Indiana. From the Zebra base, the crews would fly to Ajaccio, Corsica, codenamed Jockstrap, before making the 10-hour journey to Oklahoma, which was the code word for Israel. The code word for Israel. Oklahoma was the code word for Israel in this battle. And so Israel and the United States, these are 2 nations in covenant with Yahweh. 2 nations that have both fought the battle of abolition. And here we have this modern book telling us the story of how it was achieved. You see, we're a team, guys. And there's something special about Milwaukee, Detroit, Fort Wayne, South Bend, Goshen, the Northern Tribe. And there's something almost biblical and sacred and very, very archaic and genuine and orthodox about the Oklahoma Dust Bowl, right? Operation Dust Bowl. This is the Negev. This is the desert. This is where the battle in Israel took place. This was Israel. Oklahoma was Israel. And if you think of Israel, this is the nation that God put his name. This is the nation where God birthed the original movement of free sovereign people, representative government, economy, justice, law. It's like, it's very special. It's like the apple of his eye. You could almost say that it might have been the pioneer. I think Oklahoma has pioneered much. And Israel is a template nation. We know that God deals with all nations the way he prescribes in his book. In Deuteronomy 28, for starters, that is the blessings and the curses spelled out on how God deals with nations. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. And Israel was his first. That was his firstborn. And the United States, we are also in covenant. I'm not getting into eschatology at all. Please stay with me. Airplanes. Here we go. So, Oklahoma was the code name for Israel. The Czechoslovakia-Israel airlift was called Operation Balak. It came from the biblical name for the son of Zippor, one of Moses' wives. Zippor in Hebrew meant bird. Airplanes took code names too. The big 4-engine constellations became Cadillacs. The clunkier C-46 Commandos were Dodges. Now we're getting into like the automotive industry, right? This is Detroit. The name chosen for the Czech-produced Messerschmitt caused some knowing head nods. The code name was Messer, the Yiddish word for knife. So, Oklahoma is special. I want to take you to page 231 here. It says here, Operation Negev, Operation Dust Bowl, quote, Operation Dust Bowl made 417 round trips to the Negev, carrying 4,991 tons of material and 5,098 passengers. Most of them troops being rotated into and out of the desert. Operation Dust Bowl had a greater purpose than supplying and relieving the settlements in the Negev. You see, Dust Bowl, Israel, Oklahoma, they have a very great purpose. And both sides, Arab and Israeli, understood, I'm quoting this, that what happened in the Negev desert would determine the outcome of the war. We have to understand, guys, that what God started in Oklahoma is sacred. And that's why I believe it was codenamed Israel in the 48 war. I think these are signs from heaven to remind us that while we're all important and we all have a role, there's something very special about Free the States and those groups and those leaders. And I think both sides, in this case, Arab and Israeli, pro-life, abolition, I think both sides know that what happens in the desert, here in the Negev, down in the Dust Bowl, we know that that is going to affect the greater movement, the outcome of abolition, the expediency, the fluidness, and the casualty count. We just have to understand that the sum is greater than the parts, but the Dust Bowl is special. So I've said that a lot. There's more I could get into. You have your solo pilots like Jack Doyle, Buzz Beerling, who were your hardcore fighters. They're the ones that fly solo. Those are your Matt Brocks and like-minded people who go out and go fly high and, call over the fence. They don't like to be, governed and ruled by a lot of rules and religion. And you see that in the script here. They talk about Mickey Marcus, American Army officer, a West Point graduate, World War II soldier who, at Ben-Gurion's behest, had resigned the U.S. Army to come and join Israel. Marcus understood the task of organizing the factions of the Haganah into a real army. There's going to be folks in abolition who understand you have to come to the Oklahoma cause, right? To Israel's cause, and help bring these factions into an army. That was the case in 1948. You had different military factions in Israel that nearly almost went into civil war among themselves while combating the belligerent Arabs around them. How do you get it done if it's not just an absolute miracle? Spirit-led movement. So when Arab armies invaded Israel on May 15th, it was Marcus's hit-and-run tactics that kept the enemy off balance while the IDF fought for its existence. So the IDF, the Haganah, these factions have to come together to form a real organized army. And in the meantime, you'll have your solo pilots who are going to do things that they do to throw the enemy off balance. And don't disparage those efforts. Don't call them names. Don't get into those disputes. Let those pilots take out the bad guys. Let those pilots show off at times, They have the swag. They like to smoke the cigars and drink the bourbon. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then, at the same time, recognize that we do have the need to organize factions into larger organized groups, and that was just as they did in those days. So we don't break out in a miniature civil war with ourselves. It's amazing. Angels in the sky. It really kind of tells us a lot of wisdom. Not everybody's going to be a diehard abolitionist. Page 219. It was just the right thing to do. I wanted to fight for a righteous cause. It was the reason they had stood in long lines on wintry streets to enlist on the day after Pearl Harbor. World War II had been the mother of righteous causes. We know abolition is the mother of righteous causes. The lives filled with practical matters, going back to school, learning a profession, starting a family, good and necessary causes. But you know, not everyone that helps us is going to leave those jobs and families. Not everyone will be a diehard abolitionist. But they're still going to help. They're still willing to help. And so let them help. If they're preaching Christ crucified, we don't stop them. This is my favorite quote. Page 360. Not until later would someone point out the irony that the most dramatic air-to-air encounter of the Arab-Israeli war, none of the combatants was Arab or Israeli or even Jewish. And if you think of Arab and Israeli as like your pro-life abolition groups, right? Like these are supposed to be like born of the same womb, right? Like Jacob and Esau, they were twins, and now they've divided, and you have warring nations, right? You have this faction in the abolitionist movement, pro-life, abolition. Well, what if some of the greatest battles and the greatest strides won't even involve us or the pro-lifers? What if God just humbles all of us and he just does amazing things? And what if the greatest battle had no Arabs or Jews, had no abolitionists or pro-lifers? We have to consider that. Page 370. I am not a Jew, but I feel it my duty to aid this struggling state. And that was the story of the fulfillment of Bible prophecy in 1948. The state of Israel came back into the world, not by Arab invasion, not by Jewish might, not by the United States intervention. It was by the Spirit of God. It was an absolute miracle from beginning to end. And ending abortion in the United States will be such an absolute miracle. And so, I'm an abolitionist. I believe there's a good reason to use that term often and with impact. I've spent years in the love ministries and prayer ministries, and I see no reason not to continue with the bullhorning. I have seen ministries fracture and dissolve because they were over-organized and they took on titles and leadership structures. So I just want to say, on page 250, this might be a good closing. It says here, increasingly, senior commanders made it clear that this was an Israeli defense force. Hebrew was its official language. Every senior commander in the IDF was an Israeli. If and when the war was concluded, the IDF would revert to what it was supposed to be, a Hebrew-speaking, all-Israeli fighting force. Then the angels could go home. Israel, Oklahoma, you're special. You have pioneered something. Your gifts, talents, and abilities and reach is incredible. And then up in Michigan, you guys are the angels, right? You're the angels in the sky. You come to help and aid the cause. You have swagger, you have fire, you have courage, you have books. And the job will not get done with one group. And we may be humbled. It may not be done with any of us. Imagine that. So my point would be, let those quotes speak to you. Hopefully this 35-minute video has spoken to you and reached us all in reconciliation. I think Facebook is great. I enjoy seeing some of those disputes. I like to know who's mad at who. I want to know why they're mad. If those things are only spoken of on the phone, we wouldn't know. I wouldn't have done this video if I hadn't seen those arguments. But now as I close, I want to suggest that to take this biblical, I would take us to Acts chapter 15. In Acts 15, we saw a period when this spirit-filled movement was fracturing. You had the law of Moses types breaking off from the sufficiency of Christ, and they wanted to ensure the doctrine and the traditions of Moses were not tossed away. You know, you could maybe relate that to some of the nomenclature and heritage habits and desires of, you know, pro-life or abolition. But what they did was they came together and they had a council. They had a summit. So the apostles came together and they discussed, what shall we do? Do we just throw out circumcision? And you know, even Timothy was circumcised before he went on a missionary journey. Sometimes you use the circumcision if it will help you reach people. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you use the term, sometimes you don't. The Spirit tells you when to use the words. Question is, are you all in? Are you really willing to come to the summit? Are you willing to argue with your brothers, look foolish, apologize, recognize where you've done wrong, recognize when others have done better than you? And not to confuse Acts 15's topics with the abolition topic, I feel that it really has a lot of crossover. We should come together. We should have a summit. The abolition movement across the United States should have a summit equidistant from all its parts, where we commend each other, we lift each other up, we share ideas, our websites, our documentaries. I mean, there's guys in Fort Wayne doing incredible documentaries. I've written a book. I know it's a book of abolition. I know it's going to reach so many. But in the meantime, until I'm published, I'm supporting everyone else. I'm lifting up everybody else. I'm donating to PACs and candidates. That's all I got. That's really it. So share this and let it sink in. Let those quotes speak to you. Oklahoma, Detroit, Cadillac, Dodge. What are the chances of that even being the case? I mean, what are the chances that would all end up that way? I'm just excited. I just want to see somebody call a summit. I want to see everybody throw some cash in the bucket. I want to see someone help organize it, but not too organized. And, you know, invite hundreds of people, thousands of people. Let's get as many at the summit as possible. And let the Holy Spirit just guide us and direct us to the next step, the next venue. So, blah, blah, blah. I'm way too long, 38 minutes. It's my birthday, so I get to talk too much. See you later.